whilst everyone can impulsively spend, I'm not saying it's just an ADHD issue, but I find a lot of advice kind of just skips over that. It's like, well, stop doing that and then do this. Well, we need more help in, the first bit before we can start doing the external stuff like the budgeting and following through with that.
All right, Tina, it is great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to kind of dig into what you know about finances and money. Obviously, that's a really big topic for people with ADHD. But first, I'd love to hear your origin story with ADHD. If you're officially diagnosed, what that process has been like when you first realized, hey, maybe there's something else going on. Yeah, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I got diagnosed after my son did. He got diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And that's really common for parents to be diagnosed after a child. So that's my story as well. I had a lot of issues around anxiety and I got diagnosed with high functioning anxiety. So I was kind of getting treated by a psychologist for that and it did help. But the things that I thought would go away when it was being treated didn't. So in my body, I just felt like there was something else that just wasn't the end of it. And, when I started looking into ADHD to help my son, I came across a whole lot of information that just made a whole lot of sense to me. So I sought out a psychologist that had experience with ADHD and I got assessed and got diagnosed. And then down the track, I also got diagnosed by a psychiatrist as well because I wanted to sort of explore medication and things like that. So I had to do it all again. So just in case I have any doubts that I have ADHD, I've been diagnosed twice. So
Right.
yeah.
Awesome. And what, after that diagnosis happened, how did that change your life? Where did things go kind of from there?
Yeah, it was interesting because, being an accountant, it just made me think, well, are there any accountants with ADHD? Like, is that going to affect my career? Do I need to now go do something else? So it was a process of, really digging deep and figuring out what that meant for not only me personally, but also my career. And, if I could still do what I wanted to do. And so it was a big process of just finding out a lot of information.
Right. So did you feel stuck in your career? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, did it feel like you're like, oh no, I have to do something now? Or did you feel like you could adapt? Did you feel like there was a strength to it? What did it change in your perspective of your career as an accountant? Like where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I definitely did feel stuck and I had felt stuck for a while. I felt for a really long time like I just didn't fit the career, which was a big pain point for me because I really enjoyed what I did. So I was like, well,
Mm.
why am I not suited to being here, being in, I worked in a lot of accounting firms and I thought, why am I not suited to be here if I actually do enjoy what I do? So, once I got diagnosed and I found out how people with ADHD operate at work and, things like that, then I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Being stuck in an office is not for me. So it was a bad choice of career for the type of environment that it was. But my
Mm.
brain just loved it. So I kind of came to a crossroads of, well, I need to do something. I need to get out of the office environment and perhaps, take my skills somewhere else. So, then that was the process of figuring out what that was.
Right. So how did you do that? Like where did that move you towards when you kind of decided maybe this environment wasn't the best for the way your brain worked? Like how did you kind of progress from there and get to what you're doing now, which we'll talk about shortly?
Yeah, so I just took some time off. Luckily, I got to the point where I was in a position to be able to just leave my last role and take some time to figure out everything. If I was going to do something completely different or, what that was going to look like. And at that point, I was getting contacted by a lot of adults with ADHD wanting some help, around their ADHD in general or around their money. So that kind of
Mhm.
made me go, well, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe I can help other adults with ADHD in some way. So I went and did a life coaching certification and I sort of explored that. I had some life coaching with other adults with ADHD and that was good. But then I kept getting asked to help other businesses with their accounting, and I kept getting contacted by business owners with ADHD going, you need to help me with this. And then that sparked that idea. I was like, okay, I'm starting to create a path now. My brain is starting to realize where I can take this, which has led me to where I am now.
Right. Yeah. I find entrepreneurs seem to be more likely to have ADHD. I know
Mhm.
I've seen stats that say like 10 times more likely. I don't know if that's based on studies or anything, but it's clearly that a lot of people with ADHD are drawn to the entrepreneurial life and like
Yeah.
starting new businesses because they have all these great ideas they want to pursue. And maybe they find that, like you said, the office environment isn't the best fit for them. So they find some other way to make it work. And then they get down the road. And I've run into this myself where like suddenly the financial issue becomes a real problem where they might seek out someone like you. So what sort of service do you provide when someone's coming to you and saying like, help, I have this business. It's a mess. I can't track my finances. Like what kind of work do you do with them to kind of help figure that sort of stuff out?
Yeah, so basically, I have sort of two avenues that I can help those people with. And I do help just individuals as well, not just
Mm.
ADHD entrepreneurs. So I do a lot around money coaching. So, that often involves helping people overcome impulsive spending and unhelpful spending patterns and just generally trying to get them to manage their money better in a way that works for their brain. There's a lot of money information out there that is for, it's not meant for our brain. We have to sort of figure out how to manage our money that makes sense for us. So I help
Right.
people do that. And whether that's, personal finances or their business finances, it can work for both because a lot of, principles and things cross over. And then there's accounting as well. So yeah, so I do a lot in the accounting space, helping business owners with ADHD, again, just try to help them manage their business finances. So whether that's teaching them about profit and loss and cash flow and things like that, I do a lot of trainings for business owners that have, memberships and things like that for ADHD entrepreneurs, but also helping them, set up systems in their business and all that kind of fun stuff when people just go,
Right.
what am I doing with my business finances? It doesn't make any sense. And that's when I come in and help it make sense.
Right, right. I know you kind of mentioned earlier, like a lot of financial advice is kind of meant for a neurotypical brain, and it doesn't really always make sense for us. I know that's like similar in just kind of the productivity world. Like a lot of people are all about like getting things done, the GTD philosophy. And I
Mhm.
finally, for me, figured out like that just doesn't work for me. That doesn't work for my brain. And kind
Mm.
of had to find that, hey, a lot of this advice, even if people are pushing it as the answer, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the answer for me. And I might need to find my own way of sort of approaching those problems.
Yeah.
Are there any like particular in the financial world, like any particular advice that you think is common that doesn't really work a lot of the time with an ADHD brain?
Yeah, so I find a lot of financial advice out there is, use this particular app, use this spreadsheet, get your
Hmm.
finances all in order. And for our brain, that can be really, really overwhelming. Often, as I said before, an ADHD brain is often stuck in overspending and impulsive spending. So then when we try to do all this external stuff, like create a budget and things like that, we can't follow through with it because we can create an
Hmm.
amazing budget. That's no problem. But it's the follow through. It's how am I going to stick to this? How am I going to, overcome those spending habits that are keeping me stuck and keeping me spending way too much money? And I find that there's a lot of information that skips over that because, whilst everyone can impulsively spend, I'm not saying it's just an ADHD issue, but
Right.
I find a lot of advice kind of just skips over that. It's like, well, stop doing that and then do this. It's like, well, we need more help in, the first bit before we can start doing the external stuff like the budgeting and following through with that.
Right, right. Yeah, that's definitely been my experience where I feel feel like it's fun in the right, in the right mood. It can be really fun to create a new budget. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm using this new app and it feels all great. And I'm lining all the
Yeah.
things up. Like I've used YNAB before. You need a budget, and it's got all the pretty buttons and all the things that can lay it all out. And then like adding, updating my transactions every day. And then like a week goes by and I forget a day, and then I forget 2 days, and
Hmm.
then I want something and I don't want to check the budget to see if I can get it. I just want to get it.
Yep.
And then everything sort of quickly falls apart. And I feel like I'm sort of in a cycle. It's just sort of this continuous cycle. So like what are some practical tips that you would give for breaking out of that cycle? Like how can I practically make a budget or some other solution like work for me for getting out of that, like thinking I'm going to solve the problem with this new system or this new app or whatever it is, and then not, not getting that answer and getting back stuck in those same cycles?
Yeah. So the first step would be to, recognize that that's what happens and that's completely
Mm.
okay. It's valid, and you can get help with it. I find a lot of people that I speak to kind of don't want to recognize that. They don't want to talk about that yucky stuff. They just want to go straight to the fun stuff, like help me create this budget and do all that. But you really need to come back and look at what you're struggling that is making you not want to check your bank account, not want to follow through with your budget and things like that. And yeah, it's often those habits that we're stuck in with the spending and feeling like we don't know how to manage our money. Often we pull things that we either haven't learned in childhood, like how to manage money, or things that we've learned through our parents. We pull that into adulthood, and it's all that internal things that we need to bring to the surface to be able then to move forward. But, apart from that, there's other things like gamifying your
Mm.
finances can really be helpful for a lot of people, creating little challenges for yourself, no spend challenges, or, setting a timer to be able to look at your budget or look at your spending or something like that. And visual aids as well are really, really good, because often we forget what we've spent, we forget how much money we have, we forget that we've even
Mm.
made a budget sometimes. I know I've been there. I've made a budget. I'm like, oh, that's right. I remember 2 weeks later that I was going to do all this stuff. So
Right.
putting things like visual reminders where you're going to see them, to remember, to remind you to, go into your bank account, have a look, or look at your budget or something like that.
Right. So like for visual reminders and visual
Mhm.
tools, are you talking about like whiteboards? Like what sort of things do you have in mind when you talk about that?
I'm a massive post-it person. I love my post-its. They're
Mm.
everywhere. So that works for me, and I know it works for some other people as well. But yeah, having whiteboards where you can write things down, stick it on your fridge or wherever you frequent, next to your workspace or whatever it is. And then you can just sort of write down, say you've bought something and you can just quickly jot it down. I bought this. Don't forget to, account for that when I'm looking at my finances or something, or, putting bills on there that are coming up soon. I've got post-its near my laptop of like business expenses, yearly business expenses that I forget are coming up. I
Mm.
actually write when they're due, so I can constantly see it. So it's always there, even though I get reminders in my email about it. But how easy is it just to swipe through and just forget? So having something that you can see day to day is really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I know one thing that is a struggle for me personally. I'm married, my wife is neurotypical,
Mhm.
and we sort of butt heads a lot trying to figure out finances. Like we just sort of come at it from different angles. I'm curious, do you sort of run into that when you're helping people, and like how managing finances with a couple and like ADHD couples versus like, kind of that mix, how all that works together?
Yeah, and that can be really hard, especially, I think there's pros and cons to both, whether you do have a neurodivergent partner or you have a neurotypical partner, that, you're both going to
Hmm.
run into problems. And I think just trying to communicate with your partner, if you've got some goals in mind, or if you really want to start working on your finances, it's like anything in a relationship. You really need to be open and have that line of communication. And, it may come down to just sitting down together and coming to a compromise. I know in my relationship, I definitely think about money differently to my husband, and that's just because we tend to manage it in a different way. We both have the same goals, but it makes sense to our different brains to manage it differently. So it's just about coming to a compromise on what that's going to look like. And yeah, that may take some time to sort of work through that. But I think just being completely open and having that honest conversation about, what your finances look like and working together and having that accountability as well. Often people in relationships, it really works because you've got that accountability with each other to sort of keep each other on track.
Right, right. Awesome. And you mentioned having a child with a diagnosis. Are you trying to, I don't know the age, but are you trying to kind of instill financial management ideas early? And do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I absolutely am. I do have two kids and they both have ADHD.
Mm,
So it's probably going to look a bit interesting trying to teach them about money. But absolutely, if you've got kids, it's one of those things to really start talking about it early. It's never too early to start talking about finance to children, obviously in a way that they're going to understand. So mine
hmm
are 7 and 8, and it's just the little things like, if they constantly ask for things like all kids do, and, I try to tell them like, well, we can't really do that because we've got this coming up, or we've got to pay for something else. We've just had school holidays here, so it was a conversation around, we can't go and do something that costs money every day because we're going to run out of money at some point. There's a certain amount that we have, and we need to fit things into that. My children often, because we pay a lot of stuff by card, and they're just like, "Oh, just whip out the credit card. It's okay." And I'm like,
Right.
"Well, that's not, and it's not an unlimited amount." So it's just about talking to them in ways that's going to make sense to how old they are, and then you can kind of build on that as they get older. And I always like to direct people to financial advisors who put information out about that kind of stuff. There's books out there that you can read by financial advisors that really help you to understand how to talk to kids about money if somebody really has no idea how to do that.
Yeah, I know a book that I've been reading recently. It's not specifically for kids, but has really kind of helped my wife and I rethink our finances. It's called Worry-Free Money. And it kind of takes the idea of sticking to a budget and it blows it up a little bit. Like it
Yeah.
still is about having a budget, but it's kind of about separating your overall budget into big categories. Like, hey, maybe like having a separate bank account all for your fixed bills. And there's some other ideas in there that really sort of takes away. Cause I know my own struggle is often we'll do our budget and it's like, yeah, technically we have a budget, but I don't really look at it a lot.
Mm.
And then what ends up happening instead is I just like check the bank balance. And I'm like, oh, the checking account has this much money in it. So I probably am fine. But in the back of my mind, I'm always kind of worrying, like, is there going to be a whole bunch of bills that come due that I didn't realize were coming in right now? And so
Mm.
I end up always kind of having in the back of my mind, anytime I spend money, even if it's money that I have available, I feel like there's just that sense of always kind of feeling bad about spending money, and it never feels like okay to do.
Yeah.
And that just kind of creates that negative relationship, which is no good.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really hard having that sort of negative feeling around money. One good thing that people could try is having a certain amount allocated. So exactly what you said about having the different bank accounts, you have a bank account for your fixed expenses, have a allocation of money that you can just spend. It can just be a small amount that, even if there's a bill come in that you weren't expecting, you've still got a small amount that you can use for those impulsive habits that we do have. And I think that's really important to not push too hard against that. Yes, we need to work through that so it's not happening all the time. But for us,
hmm
having that little bit of money, put it in a separate account, and that when you spend that money, it's completely fine. So those feelings
Right.
hopefully don't come up.
Yeah, because I find that without having that, because there's kind of that negative association, what ends up happening is I just kind of say, well, heck with it all. And then I get myself into trouble because I just like blow a bunch of money that I don't really have. And then we're like trying to fix the situation. Yeah. So I like that idea of having kind of like, well, this is my safe money to kind of waste a
Hmm.
little bit on whatever I want. And it's not
Yeah.
wasting. It's just like my own sort of fund reserve or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
So yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And then hopefully, once you've done that satisfies that dopamine and that need to impulsively spend. And then once you've done that, then you've got those other accounts that you can, you don't have to touch because you've had that satisfaction of being able to just blow that money.
Right. Because sometimes that's what you want to do. You just want to I want to be a little frivolous and I just
Mhm.
want to kind of spend, it's the retail therapy or whatever they call it, which can
Yeah.
get you into trouble. But sometimes that is kind of just hits you just right.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. So we mentioned the right app isn't necessarily the solution, but I wonder
Mhm.
if there is any specific apps or more specific types of budgeting techniques. There's the, zero base or anything in
Mhm.
particular that you recommend a lot to different clients and stuff.
Yeah, and this is hard because it's different for everybody. What works
Right.
for one person isn't going to work for another. So generally, I give people the option of whether they want to use an app, they want to use a spreadsheet, or they just want to use pen and paper. Pen and paper is
Mm.
great for people with ADHD, and I find that's, again, as we were talking about the neurotypical advice. A lot of advice out there is, oh, don't use pen and paper because it's not the best way. But for our brain, often it is, because having to write it down rather than just open an app or a spreadsheet helps us process that information. So if you pull out a pen and paper and you go into your bank account, start writing down exactly what you've been spending, it's going to help your
Mm.
brain process that a little bit better and be like, okay, this is what's actually going on. But you mentioned you need a budget app before. That's actually really, really popular with people with ADHD, so people can look into that. There's also an app called Mint and Pocketbook. I think Pocketbook might be Australian only. I'm not sure. I have used that one
Mm.
before. And then, yeah, obviously you've got templates for spreadsheets and Google Sheets and things like that. And yeah, I am a fan of zero-based budgeting because it's the idea is that every dollar that comes into your bank account has a job.
Right.
But often I work with a lot of people who wouldn't even be able to do that because A, they're not budgeting to begin with, and they're not having enough money to the next payday. So it's about, not necessarily at first looking at whether you're going to do zero-based budgeting or another thing. It's purely, again, bringing it back to basics and actually having a look at what's being spent and what's coming into your bank account and starting there. And then all those different things like zero-based budgeting can come down the track.
I'd love to transition to doing shiny objects right now.
Yeah.
And shiny objects is just a chance to share something that is, grabbing your fancy lately, something you've been enjoying and having fun with. I'll go ahead and go first. So my job is I'm a front end developer, and so I'm typing on the keyboard a lot. And so I've sort of invested in having a really nice keyboard, but it's called the Ergodox EZ, and it's a split keyboard. And most people that look at it, they think it looks like it's, I don't know, out of something science fiction because it's in two
Mhm.
different pieces and it's got it's just doesn't look like any sort of normal keyboard. It has a different thumb pad with 6 keys just for that. I'll post a picture for in the show notes for this, but that is something that helps me to engage with the work I do with software development, and just I love setting up all the little shortcuts and all those things with that keyboard. So that's my shiny object for today.
Okay, my turn. A long-standing, it's not shiny object, but a long-standing interest of mine is
Hmm.
fraud. Not committing fraud, but learning about it, learning
Yeah.
about, stories about it and why people do it and things like that. And my current story is about the story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Have you heard about that
Hmm.
one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I've just become completely obsessed with it. My husband got me onto watching the documentary because he watched it one night. He's like, you've got to watch this. And I
Right.
watched
Is
it
that the one?
and
There's a documentary and there's a sort of fictionalized version. Is that correct?
oh yeah, kind of, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
the documentary, and then they made a docu-series about
Right.
it,
Yeah.
which is based on a podcast. So I've been making my way through all of these. It's I'm learning, I'm hearing the exact same stuff, but it's in a different
Yeah.
medium. And then I'm on YouTube and I'm looking up YouTube videos about it, and it's my current obsession. I'm just loving hearing the story and what the
Right.
outcome of
Right.
that's going to be.
Yeah, that's so wild. That's the where this $1 billion business was built on on nothing, basically, right? They were just sort of like faking the technology the whole way.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so it's an incredible story, and just, the investors, the kind of investors that were putting money into it, and yeah, just all the people that were working there, just basically not doing a whole lot. So it's an incredible story if anybody is interested in that kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely have the links to those in the show notes. So if you want to check out some fraud, not committing it, but seeing what other people
Yes.
do with it, we'll have some links to check that out. Yeah, and awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and sharing some of this financial advice for
Mhm.
the ADHD brain. Where can people, if they want to find out more or follow you and the work that you're doing, where can people go to do that?
So the best place to go first is my Instagram, because that will have links to everything else. So my Instagram
Hmm.
is at the ADHD accountant, and from there you'll find links to YouTube and Facebook and how to work with me and all that stuff. And then there's obviously information on my Instagram. And if anyone's on Facebook, I also have a group called ADHD Money and Finance, and you can pop in there and have a bit of a chat.
Awesome. And I'll have links to all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much, Tina. This was awesome.
Great, thank you. It was fun. Thanks for having me.